Well, it says I'm live. Am I live? Somebody let me know in the chat panel. Am I live? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Somebody let me know in the chat panel. I can see that TM's already there, which is great. But am I already there? I guess it's not the bigger question, but certainly without me being in the live stream, it doesn't go very far very quickly. So there we go. Thank you, Motsam. Motsam. That's difficult to say. I'm going to call you Moksam. Hopefully that's okay. And TM is far simpler. And there's Sam again. Good afternoon. Good evening. Thanks for joining again, Sam. If you're here, if you can hear me, let me know in the chat panel that you're here and where you're coming from as well. Hi, Envoma. So where are you? Are you UK? If you're in the UK, whereabouts are you? Are you overseas? If you're overseas, what country are you from? Be good to know. See if there's any new people. Mock Sam, I don't recall seeing your name in the past, so welcome. Thanks for joining. Let us know in the chat panel where you're joining from. So I've got an idea of the spread of people this evening. Finland again. You've not moved then in the past 7 days then, Envoma. Finland again. Tony's in Dublin. Hi, Tony. Tony, is it your first time joining? I don't recognise the user ID TM. I know you've been commenting across on YouTube, so thank you for that. It's appreciated. But I don't recognise your Waste Yellow 1, yes, I recognise your name. I don't recognise TM, Tony in Dublin. So, wherever you're joining us from, whenever you've been here in the past or haven't been here in the past, welcome, thanks for joining. Today, I think this is the 5th live stream that we've done. And as always, I want to give a really, really quick, very quick overview as to the previous sessions that we've done. Now, I'll be honest, I've forgotten what order that we've done them in. So in no particular order, we looked at maps, we looked at compasses, we dove back into maps again. Then we took a look at navigation kit, which of course included maps and it included compasses, but it also included a lot of other stuff as well. And I think that's taken up the past 4 weeks. So this being the 5th week, 4, 5, yeah, 5th week, and this week we're going to look at some critical map checks, things that I consider to be critical map checks when you pick up a map either for the first time or perhaps for the first time in a little while. And also we're going to talk about scale as well, because the critical map checks include an element of scale, but I think it's important to talk about scale separately as well. TM's for Tom Murphy. Of course the last name's Murphy, Tom, if you're in Dublin. Of course it is. Why didn't I piece that together myself? So wherever you're joining us from, whenever you're joining us from, whether you've been here for the previous 4 weeks, whether this is your first week here, welcome, welcome, welcome. The first thing that I want to have a chat about this evening are these map checks that I've been sort of referring to in the lead up to today's live stream, and I've also mentioned them a few times just now, these map checks. There are 4 map checks, and I'm going to type the acronym to them into the chat panel there. You'll notice I've just typed in the word SAVAGE, or the acronym SAVAGE. Of course it's not the correct spelling of the word, but it's quite easy to remember. SAVAGE is a word in itself, so it's a fairly easy word to remember. Each element of that helps you to remember a different thing to check for when you pick up a map for the first time, or you perhaps pick up a map for the first time in a little while. The first thing to check for is scale. What is the scale of the map? Now, I'm going to go into scale in more detail towards the end of this session. This is a map of Snowdon. The scale is 1 to 50,000. This is a map of Snowdon. The scale is 1 to 25,000. Same area of the country, same area of Wales, very different scales. Now, we are going to talk about scales later on, but it's important when you pick up a map for the first time that you double check the scale of the map. Maybe you've been working for a long time on 1 in 25,000 maps. Maybe you've just become accustomed and attuned to working with that scale. But then you might pick up a 1 in 50,000 map. If you don't stop yourself, if you don't introduce these map checks as a normal part of your behaviour, there is a really, really, really good chance that you are going to treat this map in the same way that you would treat this map. And all things being equal, you're really going to come unstuck if you do that, for reasons that we'll talk about when we talk about scale. This is also a 1 in 50,000 map, but it's a French map of the Pyrenees. This map represents 1 centimetre being 4 centimetres on the ground. And I have another map here that's got no scale on it whatsoever. So scales change between maps. There is no such thing as one scale across every map that you might come across. You might always work in one particular scale. You might always use one particular scale, but there are plenty of other scales out there, and you never know when you might be faced with a situation where you have to use somebody else's map. Maybe you're in a tourist centre or you're at the head of a trail and there's one of those huge maps pinned up on a board behind some perspex. That might be a different scale to your map. So getting into this habit of checking the scale of the map every time you pick it up is a damn good habit to get into. So the S of Savage stands for scale. In the chat panel now, just drop me in there. What's the scale of the map that you normally work in? Is it 1 in 25? Is it 1 in 50? Is it something else? Let me know in the chat panel there. What's the scale of map that you predominantly work in? Or if it was your preference you would work in all the time. Let me know in that chat panel. Let's see what people are used to working in. My Alcoholics Anonymous sponsor, Jim, isn't online tonight by the look of it. But if Jim's watching the replay, Jim, I'm back on the Henry Westerns. I'm back on the 8.2%. I was really proud of myself last week. I drank a bottle of this and I only had to change the bedclothes once during the night because I crapped myself. So really proud of myself. So I'm going with it again this week. Big boy. TM's 1 in 50,000. Sam, you said 1 in 5,000. Is that a typo? Should that be 1 in 50,000 and you've just missed a zero off? Trust me, I did it earlier on today and I was going to sell something to somebody for a ridiculously inflated price till they stopped me. Oh, here we go. Anthony's popped up now. Stand by your beds. Anthony's online. So Anthony's saying it sometimes even in the same atlas, the scales change. Could you expand on what you mean by that, Anthony? Because I've never ever seen a map where the scale changes on the same map sheet. Now you use the word atlas there, so we may be talking about something different here, but I've never seen a map sheet change its scale or have more than one scale upon it. Unless it's sort of something in the top right hand corner that shows you a broad area, and then the main map sheet shows you a more detailed area. So we've got Anthony saying it's a range of them. Ah, yeah, no, yes, that would make sense, Anthony. Yeah, that would make sense. So not on a single map sheet, which is my experience as well, but on a broader collection of them. Yes, absolutely they could. Mox, I'm still waiting to hear back whether you do use a 1 in 5,000 or it's a 1 in 50,000. Could just be a typo. Let us know in the chat panel when you've figured out whether it was a typo or not. So that's scale. Important to check it because, as we'll see later on, scale really, really matters. You could end up with an incredibly long day that you'd not planned for, or you could end up with quite a disappointing day because it's over before you know it. Story of my life. So scale's important. Moving on from the scale to the A for alpha. Anybody want to drop an idea into the chat panel what the A stands for? S for scale. What does the A stand for? I shall wet my whistle. So we know scale is important. You pick a map up, you check the scale of the map. What's the next thing we should be checking? Begins with an A. I'll give people a few more seconds. Oh, you'll kick yourself. You'll kick yourselves. Boo-doo, 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 boo. So nobody's dropped in with an A. A standing for age. What's the age of the map? How old is the map? This map here of Snowdon area of range of Wales. All the bad puns are coming out now, Anthony. Anthony went for altitude. It wasn't altitude, but in a way, in a loose way, we're going to come on to that. It's a very broadish sense of altitude. We will come on to that, Anthony, but no, the A stands for altitude. So moving on to the A for age. This is a map 2001. This map, 1 in 25,000 of the same area, was 2000 and... crikey, I forget. It was... talk amongst yourselves. 2004, so 2006. So 5 years or so apart, those two maps there. They are old maps. These maps have been reprinted and resurveyed, I assume, since then. If we think about why it's important to think about the age of the map, a map is very probably out of date by the time you buy it. If you think about when you go into a bookshelf or a bookshop or a map store or Amazon and select a map, prior to that, that map has gone through a production process, finishing with it landing on the shelf, starting with, and I'm no cartographer, but the area being surveyed or being resurveyed or being rechecked. There is a gap, there is a process, there's a time scale for those things happening. The world doesn't stand still, as we're all too aware. Things change. Forestry blocks spring up. Sadly, forestry blocks also are chopped down as well. Roads are created. Roads are washed away. Rivers can be rerouted. Rivers can burst their banks. Lakes can be created. Housing estates can be created. All of these things, they don't happen overnight, but they can certainly happen since 2001. They can certainly happen since 2006. So these maps here, I would never actually go out on the ground with these maps. I would make sure that I had the most up-to-date maps that I possibly had when I went out on the ground. And even then, I would be very mindful that the ground is always up to date. It's always correct. It's never wrong. It's like my wife. The map has the potential to be out of date. The ground never is. The ground's never wrong, okay? It's never wrong. The ground is real. The map is at best a memory, a snapshot of the ground at the time that it was surveyed. If you think that through to its logical conclusion, if you pick up a map and it is the best part of 20 years old and you've got nothing else to use, you need to be acutely aware that it may be inadvertently providing you with an incorrect perception of what the land should look like. The land won't know. The land will always give you a correct idea of what it looks like because it's up to date. The map isn't. If you pick up a map that is not 20 years old, maybe it's 2 years old, there is a better chance of that map being up to date than this one, yeah? But it's still not guaranteed. Things can still happen in 2 years. At the end of my road, on an area that used to be open farmland, there's now a housing estate, sadly. That wasn't there 2 years ago. So if I had a map from 2 years ago, I'd be expecting to see green, open farmland on the map. If I arrive there in person, that's not, sadly, what I see anymore. So checking the age of your map when you pick it up, look at the scale, look at the age, you're starting to make sure that things aren't going to trip you up. You're not going to be estimating the incorrect scale. You're not going to be over-relying on the map, or you're going to be at least be aware of the vagaries of inaccuracy in any map, let alone a 20 or 19, 20-year-old map. So the scale and age are two of the 4 things that you should check for whenever you pick up a new map or pick up a map for the first time. So let's have a look back in the chat panel. Let's think about the age of a map. When you go out, the maps that you've presumably got, you've obviously purchased them at some point in the past. It might have been yesterday. You might have stole them like I did the best part of 20 years ago. Do you always make sure that when you're going out on the ground you've got the most up-to-date version, or do you just rely on what you've got and accept that it could well be very out of date? Let me know in the chat panel. Always up to date, or do you just go with what you've got and cross your fingers? Let me know in the chat panel. It's an easy one to overlook, the age of a map. You know, we look upon these maps as being, you know, as being gospels of truth, as being sources of truth, as being infallible, and it's you know, it's not the case. Despite all the cartographers' best efforts, there are inherent errors in maps even when they're produced. So we shouldn't rely on them entirely. And certainly, the older a map is, it's like people's memory, the more fallible that it is, the more open to error that is on the map. So let me know in the chat panel. Do you go out with the most up-to-date version that there is, or do you go out with whatever you've got on your bookshelf? It's always a bit awkward doing these live streams because there is something of a delay. So even though I've asked you some time ago to put your answers in there, I'm sat here now twiddling my thumbs. There we go. And Vomi saying, usually use what I've got. I have some boating maps and stuff like that. Okay, and Vomi. From a boating perspective, I guess the sea never changes. It's always wet. It's always got waves. Do coastlines change a great deal? I suppose they do. They're constantly being eroded, although I imagine that's over, you know, over more than our lifetimes. So it's an interesting one. Do nautical maps need updating? I don't know. I don't know. You tell me. I don't use them. So Anthony's going with, which is I think a bloody safe assumption. He takes for granted that no map is correct, and I think it's an incredibly wise thing to do. Anybody, clearly, the older the map, the greater the likelihood is that it's going to be giving you a few porky pies, a few little white lies. But even a map that you've bought recently isn't infallible. So I think that's a sensible approach to take, Anthony, without a doubt. Tony's come up with an interesting perspective here. He's sort of hit the nail on the head. He's doing a map and skills course. He's had to buy a new map for the course. Makes sense. That said, it's already compromised. So even though he's got a brand new map, it's the most up-to-date map that he can buy for that area. He accepts already that there's going to be some inaccuracies in it. Have you spotted those inaccuracies already, Tony? Or are you just assuming that they're on there? Or have you already spotted them? Do you know that they're there? It'd be interesting to know. So Anthony and Vohm are having a nautical map chat here about the fact that actually I was wrong, that nautical maps can change quite severely. Shows how often I get out on the water, doesn't it? No idea what goes on out there, more inland. So we've looked at scale, we've looked at age. The next one is a little bit misleading, so I'm going to type it in together. The V and the I are actually coupled together. They're two words, one starting with V, one starting with I. Give you a little bit of a clue. Anthony was kind of in the right area when he spoke about altitude. He was sort of knocking on the door of what the V and the I stand for. So we've looked at scale, we've looked at age. What does the VI stand for in terms of checking your maps? There aren't many words on a map, are there, that can be related to the word V. It's a pretty, it's not a particularly commonly occurring letter in lots of words, let alone to do with mapping. So Tom's going back to my question about the map he's bought for his mountain skills. He's saying he spotted them. He's not just assumed that he's spotted them. Forestry boundaries have changed. So what does this VI stand for, do you think, folks? Remember, Anthony was in the right ballpark when he spoke about altitude. And Voma clearly spends a lot of time out on the water. Good on you. I'd love to do some canoeing, you know, some proper sort of lengthy canoe trips, but every picture I see of people in canoes at some point, they're on their knees, and that isn't happening. Not with my knees, so I'll let other people crack on with that. So Anthony's come with vertical or very inaccurate. You're 50% there, but I'm not telling you which 50%, but it shouldn't be hard to figure out, should it? The VI stands for, drum roll please, vertical interval. VI, vertical interval. What's that in lay people's terms then? A vertical interval is the distance between contour lines. What's a contour line? If you look at your maps, depending on what your map is, you will see some browny, orangey, squiggly lines probably running all over the map. Depending on the map itself, depending on the shape of the land, the scale of the land, those contour lines might be quite far apart. There might be big gaps between them. They might be really tightly packed together. The distance between them on the map is probably going to be millimetres, or maybe centimetres. What is it on the ground though? That's the important thing. What's the vertical interval? What's the distance between the contour lines on the map? And what does that equate to on the ground? Now, I've got a bit of it's not a trick question, it's a genuine question, but it's very easy to get the wrong answer. I'm going to aim this at all of you, but knowing that Tony is going on a mountain skills course, or has been on a mountain skills course, or he's doing a mountain skills course, this is probably something worth tucking up your sleeve, Tony, for when you go on that course. Ordnance survey maps in the UK. Apologies for my overseas brethren, but you feel free to weigh in with your countries. 1 in 50,000 map of the UK in the UK. Ordnance survey. What's the vertical interval of a 1 in 50? And what's the vertical interval of a 1 in 25? What's the difference between the two? What's the vertical interval? What is the representational difference between the gaps in the contour lines between a 1 in 50 ordnance survey and a 1 in 25 ordnance survey? Overseas brethren, feel free to weigh in whatever it is in your country. It's a little bit of a trick question, but it's also not a trick question. Whilst you're having to think about that, anybody that's joined today that isn't already a subscriber to the channel, it would be great, like that, it'd be great if you could consider becoming one if you want to see more of these videos, more of my channel, you don't want to miss out on anything coming up in the future. Hit that subscribe button, click the bell notification, and you shouldn't miss anything in the future. No answers coming in. Unless you've got a map in front of you, or you've quickly dashed off to get one, or you deal with maps a lot, can be a tricky question to answer. Even to give the default knee-jerk answer. TM saying it depends on the darkness of the line. Without being curt, it kind of doesn't. The darkness of the line is the index contour line, which represents a certain amount of contour line. So in order for when you're scanning the map, you can see the index contour line. Depending on your map, you can say, okay, that's occurring every 25 metres, or it's occurring every 50 metres. It's a way of being able to very quickly tune in and get a sense of the lay of the land without looking at the minutiae. So it's not quite to do with the thickness or the darkness of the line, although that will definitely help you with your terrain analysis. So let me whisk away the veil of mystery and also lead you down the path of realising that actually the answer is it depends. 1 in 50,000 map of Snowdon. The contour interval is 10 metres. 1 in 25,000 map, and this is where it differs in the UK. 1 in 25,000 map of a relatively local area to me. The contour interval of this one is, make sure I've picked up the right map, because I've got 2 on my desk now. Contour interval of this map, 1 in 25,000 map, 5 metres. So between the orangey brown lines on this map represents a distance or a height change of 5 metres on the ground. That's a 1 in 25,000 map. Let me hold it there. That is a 1 in 25,000 map. The contour interval or the vertical interval on this is 10 metres. These are both 1 in 25,000 maps. Vertical interval 5, vertical interval 10, but they're the same scale map. It's a common trap people fall into. Lowland areas of the UK, I can't speak for overseas, but low-lying areas where there isn't really significant hills, mountains, valleys, it's relatively undulating in the big scheme of things. Like where I live, there isn't much of a change in the shape of the ground overall. Don't get me wrong, there's some hills I don't want to run up and down too often, but in the big scheme of things it can be represented with a vertical interval of 5 metres. Same scale map, 1 in 25,000. This is of Snowdon. For anybody that's been to the Snowdonia National Park area, you will know that it is not undulating. It is not a relatively sort of modest altitude change from one area to another. There are some big, severe mountains and valleys and re-entrants and spurs and everything else in that area. Significant. Therefore, even though it's the same scale map, 1 in 25,000, the vertical interval is 10 metres. It's the same vertical interval of a 1 in 50,000 map, believe it or not, because it needs to show that change of ground quickly and accurately. Therefore, it increases the vertical interval. So one for you perhaps there, Tony, when you're on your MLs course or your mountain skills course, don't know the area that you're going to be operating on, but don't assume that just because you're using a 1 in 25,000 map and it is a 10 metre or a 5 metre interval, that all 1 in 25,000 maps represent that, because it can change depending on the actual nature of the ground in the real world. Will depend not on the scale but on the vertical interval between those contour lines. It's a tricky concept to get your head around unless you've got these 2 maps like I have in front of you, or 3 maps really in front of you. It can be a difficult concept to sort of wrap your head around that. Even on the same scale of map, 2 different maps might have very different contour vertical intervals. It could even be 2 adjoining map sheets. One could be 5 metres, one could be 10 metres. I'm thinking there are parts of Wales, as it drops into the Welsh, the Cheshire borders, becomes relatively flat. So it wouldn't be this stretch of the imagination to think I can move from one map sheet to the next one. The scale stays the same, but the vertical interval doubles. VI, vertical interval. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Tony. Hope that comes in handy. If not for your mountain skills course, maybe a pub quiz in the future. So we've talked about scale, we've talked about age, we've talked about vertical interval. Finally, we end up with the G. What does the G, do you think the G stands for in this savage acronym that reminds us of the things to check when we pick a map up for the first time, or the first time in a little time? So Envelma's saying, don't quote me on this, but I think in Finland 5 is the most common. I think in the UK, to be fair, Envelma, a 5 metre interval for our 1 in 25,000 maps is also fairly common. It would probably only be when you got to places like South Wales, North Wales, the Lake District, Scotland, possibly not even the Peak District, that you would see it changing, because England is a relatively flat country. Most of the 1 in 25,000 I've seen of lower lying areas are 5 metre intervals. You get up to those bigger hills, bigger mountains, 10 metres. So yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. And he's saying that some of the contour lines in 20, 40, 60 are marked bigger. Those are those index contour lines. I would hold a map up, but it's very difficult to see, and it blurs the detail. But yeah, it's not uncommon to see those certain contour lines on your map will be marked thicker than others, and will probably also have a thick indication as to the height that they are representing as well. Hey Jeff, I am indeed. I think I'm live. People are talking to me, so either I'm hearing voices and seeing voices, or I am actually live. It's been a while since I've seen you, Jeff. I heard from you, so it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. We've just been talking, Jeff, about critical map checks to carry out whenever you pick up a map for the first time, or you've perhaps picked up the map for a little while. Some checks to carry out that take you seconds to check. They don't take a long time, but they help you to tune you into what that map will or won't be telling you, and the accuracy to what that map will or won't be providing to you. That's where we are at the moment. I'm doing very well, thanks, Jeff. I hope you're keeping well as well. So we've talked about scale, we've talked about age, we've talked about vertical interval. I'm going to throw it out to everybody. Thanks, Jeff. What does the G stand for? What do you think the G of savage stands for? If you don't know your navigation stuff, you're probably going to assume one word, which is usually relating to maps and what they represent. If you know your nav stuff a little bit more technically, you're probably going to come up with what the G stands for. The G in itself is an acronym. Crikey, could it get any more confusing? Anybody going to weigh in with what they think the G stands for? Give it a few more seconds. It's been up on the screen for a while now. What does that G stand for? We're talking about topo maps, Jeff, to be honest. Not every map, I have to say, is going to show all of these 4 checks. Not all of them will contain the information or need to contain the information that I'm talking about. But if you get into the habit of thinking scale, age, vertical interval, G, I'm not going to give it away, the G, if you check for them and they're not there, that's okay. There's nothing you can do. But if you don't check for them and they are there, you could be setting yourself up for an interesting day out on the hills. So nobody's weighing in with what the G stands for. I'm surprised. Tony, I thought you might weigh in if you're doing a mountain skills course. I thought you would have touched on this, or maybe you've not been on it yet, to be fair. The G stands for, I'm typing it in, last chance folks, GMA, Grid Magnetic Angle, GMA. Now, this is possibly one of the most difficult to understand concepts with navigation unless you've been out and you've done it a lot. It's bloody hard to try and explain through the nature of a webcam without somebody being there. But let me try. The grid lines on your map, the ones that run up and down, they run up and down the map. They don't converge near the top. They don't creep closer together. They're always parallel across the map. The ones that run up and down, we would call them eastings here using Ordnance Survey Great Britain maps. Your compass, oh, those lines by the way are called grid north. They align to grid north. Your compass points in the general direction, for those of you who remember back to when we talked about compasses and some of the misconceptions around them, points towards magnetic north. Magnetic north, grid north. They're different things. Now, at certain points in time in history, they might actually be the same thing, but it's only fleeting, and it's important to realise that they're not always going to be the same thing wherever you are in the world. So this points to magnetic. The lines up and down this map point to grid north. Grid magnetic angle is a way of being able to convert any grid bearing that you've taken to a magnetic bearing, or any magnetic bearing that you've taken, convert it to a grid bearing. I remember earlier on today, Tony, you were saying that you were watching the Savage video, and I did think he's going to come armed to this session with all the answers. But fair play for not spoiling it for others. You could have weighed in, it was fine. So grid magnetic angle. It is a way of representing the difference between where that points and where the vertical lines on that map point. Grid, the GMA of a map is constantly, or shall I say in the real world, this difference between the two is constantly changing. Your map will give you the information of the difference between the two, but it will give it to you at the point that that map was produced. So this map was produced in 2006, I think I said. This tells me what the difference is between the two in 2006. This tells me what the difference was in 2001. It also tells me how to work out and calculate the change. So even though this is 20 years old, I should be able to, if I get my thinking cap on and my calculator and my 9-year-old daughter to help me, I should be able to work out, if I know what it was 20 years ago, and I know what the rate of change is, and I know that we are now 20 years later, I should be able to convert, it's a relatively simple calculation to be fair, what the grid magnetic angle is today in July 2020. That's why it's important when you pick a map up to check the grid magnetic angle. One, you might not be using an up-to-date map. That's 20 years old. Many of you have said in this chat here that you use whatever map you've got, not necessarily the latest map. Even if you've got the latest map, it might still be 2, 3, 4 years old, potentially. That grid magnetic angle, the difference between that and that has changed in that period of time. So in order for you to reduce the amount of inaccuracies in your navigation, it's important you know what it was, what the rate of change is. You can calculate what it will be today. You can now imagine if you pick up a map from 20 years ago and you don't check the GMA, you work off what it is today without calculating from this, you could be in for some problems, because the GMA is different around the GMA is different within the UK, which is a really small island. Think about that in a bigger country or globally. The GMA will significantly change depending on where you are on the Earth's surface. So just thinking of, right, well, I'm in England and it was this last week, so it'll be this when I go to Northern England next week. No. That's not necessarily the case. It's important to check it. So let's think this through. When we pick a map up for the first time, there is an acronym that it's handy for us to remember to be able to go through these checks. First person, fingers on the buzzers to type into the chat panel, what was the acronym? What was that shortened, abbreviated word to help us remember these map checks? Fastest fingers on the buzzers, let's see who it is. Jeff, where are you joining us from as well? Remind us where you're joining us from. I'm pretty sure it's the US, it could be Canada. My apologies if it is or isn't. Where are you joining us from, Jeff? And fastest fingers on the buzzers, who's going to get in there with this acronym that helps us to remember these map checks? Paul's coming with mag to grid, get rid. What he's referring to here is a rhyme that used to help us easily remember converting from magnetic to grid and then from grid to magnetic. However, Paul, well done, Savage, you got in there. However, that acronym, that rhyme doesn't necessarily ring true anymore, because in certain parts of the world, I'm pretty sure in certain parts of the UK, magnetic north has now moved east of grid north. In my lifetime, it's always been west, but creeping closer to east, it's now moved past and is now east. So actually, that rhyme doesn't work anymore. It should be almost flipped on its head. Jeff's in New York. Tom rolled in with it is Tom, is it? I keep calling you Tom. Is it Tom? It's Tony. Bloody hell, Tony. You should have corrected me. Sorry, Tony. So Tom weighed in with Savage. Well done. Folks, let's see you type into the chat panel. Who's going to be the first to tell me what the S, the A, the VI and the G stand for? Whichever one you remember first, type it into there. No, that's okay, Paul. No need to say do it. That rhyme has been around for decades. It was something I tripped off in the army without thinking about it. So it's not surprising that for many people it's still ingrained, which at times can be a brilliant thing, but at times when that logic doesn't ring true anymore, it can be a dangerous thing. So it's fine. No worry, Terry. No worry. So anybody, S, A, V, I or G, just drop it into the chat panel now. The first thing that springs to mind of all of those acronyms, S, A, V, I or G, drop it into the chat panel. Let's see which one resonates most with people. Let's see which one people, when they're asked to pick one, naturally they jump to that. Be interesting to see. Primacy, recency, or maybe there's something else at play of those 4 critical map checks. S, A, V, I and G. What immediately springs to mind when you're asked to recall them? I hope you can recall at least one of them. I should also point out at this stage, if you've got any questions about navigation, whether it's about map checks or scales, which we're going to go on to, or anything else, drop it in. Jeff's coming with G, global command. I assume you're answering the G. That wasn't global command. It wasn't global anything. Jeff, are you drinking something more stronger than I am? I'm on the 8.2 cider here. If you are on something stronger than me, at whatever time it is in New York, fair play to you. So coming up to 5 o'clock, 4 hours behind. 4 o'clock. Nobody's weighing in. No, I feel sad that nobody remembers an S and A VR or a G. Or maybe you are all drinking something stronger than I am at the moment, and you've all fallen over. You've hazed over. So Tommy's come up with G. G is for gin. G is for gin. Well done. Jeff, it was a good punt. Global command sounds like an official thing to say. It sounds like an important thing. If I'd have been pushed into a corner, I would have come up with something as equally important sounding as well. So don't worry about it. Jeff saying it's just coming up to 4 PM over in New York. Good question, Andy. I'll come on to the old Harvey's maps versus OS maps. So the first one, AK, you will now be known as 47 from this point. The first one, 47, was scale. But I'm gutted nobody, none of you. Although I do think that that Tommy, Tony, Terry, Tom is winding me up. So let's go through these. Scale, age, vertical interval, GMA, scale, age, vertical interval, GMA. If you go through those checks, whenever you pick a map up for the first time or perhaps for the first time in a while, if you look for that information on the map, if it's all there, brilliant. You've tuned yourself into that map and the information that it can give you. If it's not all there, fine. At least you've gone through the checks. It takes you seconds when you know where to look for the scale, to look for the age. They're often, in fact, all of it is actually contained on these maps in the marginal information. So you only have to sweep your eyes over one part of the map and you'll find the scale, the age, the vertical interval and the GMA. You're then in a much better position to use that map than just grabbing it out of your pack that you've not used for 12 months. You've been working in different areas of the country and applying potentially incorrect assumptions to a different map. T is for Tony, A is for apple, C is for cider. Okay, I'm going to open a window. I'm all excited, I'm becoming flustered, I'm excited, and I'm going through a middle-aged hot flush. So I've opened the window. Okay, let's have a breather here. I'm going to move on to talking about scales and what they mean, because they are often, scale as a concept is often misunderstood, but I've seen it grossly misinterpreted when people are looking for maps with detail or less detail on them. There's an interesting relationship between scale and detail which is so important to talk about, so I'm going to talk about that. Before I do though, just going to look at the chat panel. If you've got a question, let's answer Andy's question. What's my opinion on Harvey's maps versus OS maps? In all honesty, Andy, I don't have much of an opinion on them. The reason being is most of my navigation training and experience has come from being in the army, and we were always issued military versions in the UK of Ordnance Survey maps. So I've just become so exposed to them that they become my go-to. I probably wouldn't even consider a Harvey's map. Not because I'm saying that they're bad maps or anything like that. Simply, I guess it's a case of you often stick with what you know. Even if it's not good for you, even if the Harveys are better, I kind of stick with what I know. What I did read recently, really recently, was that Harvey's maps, and I don't know how accurate this is, Harvey's maps, the colouring on them is brighter or has a different contrast than Ordnance Survey maps. So when you're looking for land that is perhaps public access or restricted access, on Ordnance Survey maps they're quite subtle. They're very subtle shadings of almost a peachy colour or a very subtle green colour that can be hard to see. I believe on Harvey's maps those differentiations are more vivid, so you can see them easy. I do not know how accurate that is. It was something I've read really recently, but I've got no personal experience to bring to bear on it. If anybody else in the chat is used to using Harvey's maps in the UK over Ordnance Survey maps, then why not weigh in and give Andy some ideas in the chat as well, because there's not a lot I can bring to that, I'm afraid, Andy, other than this anecdotal experience I've got of the vividness of the colours. Let us move on to scale. Let's talk about scale. Let me almost rewind back to the beginning of this session very quickly. I've got some maps in front of me here. I'm going to hold several of them up to camera. You don't need to look at the detail of them. I'm not going to be asking you to zero in on the detail. Just want to show you some different maps. This map is a 1 to 50,000 scale. You can see it there roughly in the centre of the screen now. 1 in 50,000 scale. This map, although it's of the same area of the UK, if you look at the bottom, you might just be able to make out 1 in 25,000 scale. 1 in 50, 1 in 25. That's also a 1 in 25. This one from the Pyrenees is a 1 in 50. So we've got two 1 in 50s. We've got two 1 in 25s. the majority of my navigational experience is born across those two. Oh, one more map for you here. I think you'll like this one. Very special map. I keep this protected. This is an escape and evasion map that I was issued a little while ago. 1 in 500,000, not 1 in 50,000, 1 in 500,000. Escape and evasion map. Going to quickly unfurl it. I don't want to show you the area it's in, but it'd be interesting to know if anybody has got. Can anybody tell me what area of the world that might be from the coastline? Somebody spotted this from the coastline the other day, which I thought was quite amazing. So no more of a glimpse than that. Let's put it back down on the floor. Scott's just joined us. I've just joined. Vertical interval, is that the height between contour lines? Yes, it is. It's exactly that. The contour lines on the map don't have any height between them. They're just drawings on a flat piece of paper, aren't they? They're just lines on a flat piece of paper. They don't have any height between them, but what they represent on the ground is a change in height, either up or down. And that's what it is. It is a representation of it's the height interval, it's the height change between contour lines represented on the ground. Yes, you're quite right, Scott. Well done. And thanks for joining, even though it's a little late. Thanks for joining. The recording for this will be available from probably about 9 or 10 o'clock UK time tomorrow morning. Yes, Environment, it's a huge scale, isn't it? A 1 in 500,000 map. And I'm glad you said that it's a giant scale, because I'm going to talk about what that means from a scale perspective in a second. Let's just take half a step back. 1 in 50,000, 1 in 25,000, 1 in 500,000. Notice at no point there have I said 1 centimetre equals 25,000 centimetres. 1 inch represents 50,000 inches. 1 yard equals 500,000 yards. I've not quoted any denomination of quantity. I've not quoted any unit of measurement. I've simply said 1 to 25, or 1 in 25, or 1 in 50, or 1 in 500,000. I've not quoted a unit of measurement, and that's because the unit of measurement is, from a scale perspective, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It might mean 1 centimetre equals 25,000 centimetres. Equally, it might mean, one pair of sunglasses represents 25,000 pair of sunglasses. What the scale is saying is, one something on the map is equal to 50,000 of the same somethings on the ground. So if we take the silly example, if I was to place my sunglasses from a specific point on this map and mark where they ended on a specific point on this map, if I then went out back into the real world and took with me 50,000 pairs of sunglasses and started laying them down at the specific start point, 50,000 sunglasses later, in a straight line, I would arrive at the same point on the map where one pair ended. It could be a Mars bar, it could be a Snickers bar, it could be a popsicle, it could be a coin, it could be a centimetre, it could be an inch, it could be a more commonly used unit of measurement. But scale does not necessarily mean 1 centimetre, 1 inch. It means 1 unit of measurement on the map equals 25 or 50 or 500,000 same unit of measurements out on the ground. See if anybody's got any questions about that in the chat. It's a lot of sunglasses, Jeff. It is a lot of sunglasses. Tony's weighing in here. Who was it that asked Andy around harvest colours working well at night? I must admit, I've never had a problem with working at night with Ordnance Survey maps. I imagine if there was, the military would have changed it. But red light, I never use red light at night anymore. For two reasons. One, it makes console lines and other lines hard to see. Two, it makes blood hard to see as well. Very different between blood, sweat and water under a red lens. Really difficult. So I use white light at night, but I sometimes pinprick filter it so it's not glaring. And that for a lot of years. So there's a really high level starter for 10 in terms of scale. Does not necessarily mean 1 inch, 1 centimetre, 1 yard, 1 metre. It's 1 unit of measurement equals X amount units of measurement out on the ground. Any questions about that? Weigh them in there. Here's another map here. This is my local area. This is a park that I live quite close to, and there's an advanced orienteering course on there. This map does give a unit of measurement. It says 1 centimetre equals 40 metres on the ground. So that's not the same as 1 in 40. This is saying 1 centimetre equals 40 metres on the ground. And here's another map that is quite commonplace. You've probably got these where you live or where you visited. That's just a map of a town close to me called Lewis. It's a touristy map, it's an attractions map. It gives you a visual representation in a nice, easily understood pictorial way of where things are. But there's no scale on this map. This map is not to scale. I know Lewis quite well, and I've looked at this map. There are some streets shown on here that are significantly shorter than the way they're represented on the map. Because they're important streets, they need to be visible on this touristy map, but they can't do it to scale, otherwise you wouldn't see them. They'd be dots on the map. So not every map has a scale on them. If you've ever drawn a map for somebody how to find something, you've just sketched it on a piece of paper and it's given them enough to get there. Did you have a scale on that? Probably not. But that was a map, albeit a sketch map. So not every map has a scale on it. I would imagine the maps that we're talking about in this session that you use will have scales on them. Professionally surveyed, cartographer's level type of maps, they will have scales on them, but it's important to recognise what that scale is and isn't telling you. Let's have a look in the chat. So Tony's asking what kind of maps, Navoma's asking what kind of maps would not have a metric or imperial based units. I think I've just given sort of one there, which was a town sort of city map there. That doesn't have any units on them whatsoever. A sketch map that you've kind of perhaps plotted and sketched for somebody wouldn't have measurements on them. I'm not a flyer and I'm not a paddler, but I would assume that air charts and nautical maps have some measurement of scale on them as well, albeit perhaps different to what we're used to using, but I would imagine they would have a scale on as well. Yeah, the touristy thing. Terry's asking, okay, so Tony's now actually started signing himself off as Tony Dublin, just so I actually call him by his name. I'll play along then, Tony. Tony's asking, so what does a grid square mean at a set scale? Grid squares on Ordnance Survey maps will normally, if you look from bottom left to bottom right, in fact, if you look at in any of the corners from, around the edge of the square, it will usually be 1 kilometre. So if you were to walk from one bottom left of the grid square to bottom right of the grid square, kilometre. Bottom left to top left, grid square. Bottom right to top right, 1 kilometre. If you were to walk diagonally, bottom left to top right, bottom right to top left, approximately 1.4 kilometres would be covered. Now, I don't know all maps. I don't know all maps around the world. I'm not familiar with Harvey's maps, as I've just said there. But with Ordnance Survey maps, 1 kilometre in a straight line, diagonally, across that grid square, approximately 1.4 kilometres. And that's a really handy thing to bear in mind. Because if you are ever looking at a route, if that route is relatively straight line, I mean, is there such a thing as a straight line? But if it's relatively straight line, or you're relatively kind of going from one to the top right hand corner to the bottom left hand corner, you've now got sort of a ready reckoner in your head to say, well, okay, I'm almost going in a straight line along this path, along this track. I'm pretty much covering 3 grid squares, 1, 2, 3 kilometres. Or actually I'm walking from this track junction and I'm actually meandering along this stream here, which pretty much goes across 2 diagonal grid squares, 1.4, 2.8 kilometres. So it's a nice ready reckoner way. It's not entirely accurate, don't get me wrong, but it's a good quick way of queuing in, saying, okay, it's a 3 kilometre walk, I'm walking at this pace, therefore it will take me this amount of time. Scott saying he doesn't think the London Underground. No, I must admit, Scott, I used the London Underground for years and used both a paper-based map and an app, and I don't think that has a scale to it as well. But it's a map, right? Boy, oh boy, it's possibly the most used map on a daily basis in England. I would hazard a guess. Possibly in Europe, I don't know. But by God, it's a well-used map. Don't think it has a scale on it though. Probably has an age on it. They will update that because clearly stations closed, stations open, accessibility changes at different stations. But no, I think you're quite right. I don't think it does have a scale on it. It's a good example. Good example, Scott. So let's go back to scaling. So we know that 1 in X doesn't mean 1 centimetre. It means 1 unit of measurement equals the same units of measurement on the ground. I want to talk now. Andy said it's a diagram, it's not a map. I think you're probably right from a technical perspective, Andy, but I've never heard anybody say, do you have a copy of the London Underground diagram? You just said, do you have a copy of the London Underground map? But I take your point, I get your point. Let's talk about something really serious, because I've seen so many people waste money. That's why it's serious, because I'm a Yorkshireman and I don't want to waste money. So many people waste money on buying maps that were the wrong scale for what they wanted to get out of the map. So let's look at a few things here. The larger the scale of map, the smaller the amount of detail. Large scale equals small detail. To prove that, let me show you 2 maps that have absolute scales on them. This map, 1 centimetre equals 4 centimetres. That has a scale on it. That is my local park. This map has a scale on it, right? The escape and evasion map. 1 in 500,000. Which of those do you think includes a greater amount of detail? The large scale map or the small scale map? What has the larger amount of detail? The park map or the escape and evasion map? Oh, Jess running off to batten down the hatches here by the look of it. He's got a weather warning coming in. Of those 2 maps, which map has the greater amount of detail on it? The map of the park or the escape and evasion map? Andy's wading here, the small scale map. You're quite right, Andy. Small scale, really small scale, large amount of detail. I mean, it's showing fence posts, it's showing the centre path, it's showing the centre point of a football ground, it's showing the goal mouth of a football ground. You don't know this area, I know it well, but it's kind of showing individual fence posts around a reservoir that's there. Small scale, huge amount of detail. Large scale, really small amount of detail. I mean, it shows you rivers, it shows you motorways, it doesn't show you junctions, and it shows you towns and cities, and you know the odd peak, the odd significant peak here or there. So large scale map, small amount of detail though. And that's where so many people go wrong. They think to themselves, I want a large scale map because I need a large amount of detail. Stop. Don't press the buy now button. Flip it. Small scale equals large detail. Large scale equals small detail. I'm labouring a point here around detail being important. Maybe it isn't. Maybe detail isn't important. Maybe you don't need the detail. Maybe you need a 1 in 50,000 map just to be able to sort of navigate between some cities in a wilderness sort of area using roads and highways and things like that. So therefore, if you were to use a small scale map that gave you a large amount of detail, you'd need maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 maps perhaps to travel between 2 major cities. I'm looking at you, America. I'm looking at you, Canada. Probably not in the UK. You could potentially get away with one small scale map, one large scale map, to give you a small amount of detail. The detail contained in this map here, 1 in 50,000, would take several of these maps to cover. More weight, more cost, more likelihood of getting something wrong. So having a load of detail isn't always the right thing. It often is, but it's not always the right thing. Sometimes you just need to be able to take one map out that has a lot of detail on it because you just want to navigate using the one map. So I don't want this to sound like you should always go for large scale maps. Sorry, small scale maps to get large amounts of detail. Go with what is right for you, but you will know what is right for you by remembering this inverse relationship. Large scale, small detail. Small scale, large detail. Jeff's saying here, this is what my road atlas is for, to get between. Absolutely, look at a road atlas. I don't know how many people still have these. Jeff clearly does, but remember the AA road atlas we used to keep in the glove compartment of our car? You know, this sort of size pages. You know, you could travel from several counties here in the UK just on one double spreadsheet, one double sheet, one centrefold sheet, and that was fine because you didn't need to go and find kinks in streams or particular contour lines or where this track junction met this wood line. You just needed to travel from one city to another along the correct freeway, highway, motorway, and come off at the right junction. That was enough detail. I'm just scanning through the questions here. Question to anybody: has anybody spotted what area of the world that escape and evasion map was from? Anyone spot it from the coastline? I was gobsmacked at the guy that spotted it a few weeks ago just from the coastline. Clearly somebody that knew the area well. Thor in Dublin. I can come up with other names that begin with T, but I hardly know you, Thor. And you know, I don't want to fall out on our first date. Envoma saw it written in the corner. It is mentioned in the bottom right hand corner as I held it up to the screen. Go on, Envoma, do you want to let people know what area of the world it was from, that escape and evasion map? Quite old now. Let's look at the age on it. We talked about Savage. Let's look at the scale. So the scale is 1 in 500,000. We know that. It's not Alaska, Scott. No. Clearly it's got a coastline though, like Alaska. So 1995, which is quite timely when you think about what was happening in this part of the world then. The scale is 1 in 500,000. The age is 1995. The vertical interval is not shown because it's simply so lack of detail on this map. It doesn't show contour lines, but it does show peaks and the heights of the peaks. And the GMA is shown in that diagram there. But clearly the GMA is based upon the time the map was produced. It is the Adriatic Sea, yes. Let me hold it up then. Let me give the answer. It is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Antarctica. That's the area of the world that escape from invasion map comes from. There's nothing else really that I was planning to talk about in relation to these map checks, Savage or Scale. Scale there's not a lot to talk about with Scale, which often undermines how important it is. Remember, Scale does not necessarily mean 1 centimetre equals this. It means 1 unit of measurement equals this on the ground. Don't forget that inverse relationship. A large scale map will give you a small amount of detail. A small scale map will give you a large amount of detail. It's an inverse relationship between scale and detail. Don't get caught out. Don't go spending money fruitlessly. Oh, look at Jeff. Jeff's weighing in with the right answer. Now I've told everybody what it is. Of course you were, Jeff. Of course you were. So, any questions for me, folks, on Scale, on map checks, or anything navigation-wise? We're coming up, we've gone past the top of the hour here. Anything else that you want to talk about navigation-wise, any questions that you've got, anything like that, you've got about 30 seconds to drop it into the chat panel for me to sort of draw upon. Otherwise, I'm going to wish you all a good evening. What I am going to do, though, I feel a bit cheesy doing this, so apologies, but it's worth me mentioning. After last week's live stream, a guy that had been on a previous live stream called, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Escobar. Not easy to forget if you've been watching Narcos on Netflix. He said, have you ever thought about setting up a Patreon account? Because people might consider paying into it. I had thought about it in the past. It's always felt a bit awkward, I will admit, but I thought to myself, it takes me no cost to set one up, so I've done one. I'm going to drop the link into it. I feel a bit like Oliver with his begging bowl, but I'm going to drop a link into there. If you ever want to become a patron of my YouTube channel and get some additional perks and bonuses and some navigation exercises that I'm not going to be putting on YouTube, head over there, have a look. If you think it's worth it and you want to support my channel, brilliant. If you don't and you just want to carry on watching the videos that I put on there, that's cool as well. No hard sell, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it seems like a good idea, and any extra money to buy things like batteries and stuff like that for the camera is always appreciated. I won't mention it again. The link is the link there? Yeah, the link is there. I'll leave it up to you. No questions seem to be coming in, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up this live stream right now. I will let it render overnight, and this time-ish tomorrow morning, give or take an hour or two, it will be live, available as a replay on my YouTube channel. Don't forget, if you're not yet a subscriber, it would be great if you could become one, just so A, you don't miss out on any future videos from me, and B, you'll get a notification when I upload anything in the future. So on that note, folks, I'm going to say a huge thank you. Too many names to mention, lots of people sort of drifting in and drifting out, but I'll say a huge thank you for everyone that joined this evening. A bigger thank you to everybody that kind of got stuck in and asked a question or answered a question. It's a huge help. You're very welcome, T in Dublib. Are you sure you're not on the side as well? You're very welcome, Jeff. Jeff, I know you've missed the previous 4 weeks, but if you want to catch up on them, they're also available on my YouTube channel as well, in their own little separate playlist, so they're easy to find. You're welcome, Andy. No problems at all. No problems at all. Happy to help. You're welcome, Scott. Thank you. And you have a nice evening, Envoma. Oh, and folks, as you're drifting off, if you'd click the like button back on you, well, you're on YouTube, I'm not, but if you'd click the like button on YouTube, that will help massively as well. Thank you. Gingy eyes for Jim. Ga 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 ga. Right, folks, I'm going to wrap the recording up now. Feel free to still drop things into the chat panel if it lets you. But on this note, I'm going to end the stream, and I'll see you all online at some indeterminate point in the future. Take care, guys. Stay safe.